Okay, we are here for our Bible study on and we're in the 1 year Torah portion for those who don't know what that is. This time we are looking at "And he went out," which is Genesis 28:10 through Genesis 32:2. There are associated passages with this, and you'll be able to find a list of this. All of the reading plan that we're on can be found on the homepage of TorahResource.com. So a lot going on, as always, with the 1 year Torah reading portion. There is a ton going on here. Essentially, the gist of the story that we're reading is Jacob has now taken the blessing from his brother and Esau, and Esau is not happy about it, and Esau is plotting against him. And so Jacob's mother tells him, "Get the heck out of here," right? And he leaves, and he goes and he finds a wife. And ultimately, the entire narrative really deals with Isaac and his uncle / father-in-law.
Or Jacob and his uncle. Yeah.
I'm sorry, Jacob and his father-in-law.
I do the same thing.
That's what I meant. Jacob and his father-in-law, and how Jacob is mistreated by his father-in-law. So I'm gonna make one statement real quick, and then I'm gonna throw it over to you. Last night, I was talking with my wife, and she said, "So tell me what you think about this passage." And I said, "I don't know if I'm allowed to say this, but I don't think that Jacob is super likable. He's not like the way that the narrative presents him. He's not a great guy." Now we have to be careful because obviously the scriptures tell us that God says, "Jacob I've loved, Esau I've hated." Right? So God loves Jacob, and therefore we too should love Jacob. But the way that he's presented, I really have a hard time with him. He takes a blessing, which is not his, and this is different than the birthright. Now, I'm not saying that he's not entitled to this, right? Obviously, he wants the blessing, and this is something to be desired. So this isn't, but he does it in a, he kind of tricks his dad to get this blessing. So it's kind of like, okay, but he's supposed to have it. But then when he leaves, he goes and he finds his cousin, and he wants to marry his cousin. And at this point, there's enough people on the earth. We're almost wondering, is this scripture, is this biblically sound to be marrying someone so close in the family? He marries a woman who, now she steals the idols from her father, but the house doesn't seem to be, centered on Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh. There's other gods in the house. So he's finding a woman from an idolatrous house. He marries sisters, which is clearly against Torah. And now I know people are going to say, well, the Torah came later. I think that the laws of not marrying a sister could possibly still be in act at this point. And he takes multiple wives, something that doesn't seem to be, doesn't seem to be on the up and up. And so the whole thing.
Well, and the women behind the scenes, like the Torah just tells us about this, I don't know, what would you call this? Like this bickering and one-upmanship between Leah and Rachel. And
some people might actually even
kids. They're naming all the kids after
exactly.
They're after these struggles and oh yeah, I God's on my side now, therefore I'm going to call you. Know what I mean?
So yeah, but I mean, all of this put together, it's like, man, and I said to my wife, I said, I think that God is showing us that He's using imperfect people.
Amen.
To bring about,
absolutely.
The tribes of Israel come from this really messed up family life. And whether or not, I understand that we're coming from a Western perspective, and that's going to look a lot different than, this Near Eastern first century, or well, not even first century, 1400s, 1600s, 18, however you date it, mindset. It's much different than our Western minds. I get that. But still, even if you're trying to really look at it from a Hebraic perspective, Jacob still has a family life that is just not great. And yet God uses this, and he does this throughout the scriptures. He even says, I chose Israel because they were the lowliest, right? And so, I mean, he's using people that are broken people to bring about his will, and he shows that he still loves them. His mercy endures forever, right? So, but still, even with that, I have a hard time looking at Jacob and being like, yeah, and I, as I was going to bed, I thought, the scriptures tell us that we will come from north, south, east, and west to dine at table with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And so I'm going to have to, there could certainly be a time when I'm sitting at a banquet across from Jacob, and the words that I say right now might be laid on the table. Like, hey, what are you talking about? Right? So I got to be careful, but at the same time, that was my overall feeling about this text, is that Jacob doesn't seem to be placed in the greatest of light. Go for it, Rob.
Yeah. A verse that comes to mind is Paul's, that beautiful passage from 1 Corinthians 13, when Paul's talking about love. And he says, love does not rejoice in iniquity, but rejoices in the truth. And there's definite struggle, like Jacob's struggling. And, when you think, we're given the scriptures to meditate on.
Right.
Like God, by Moses' hand, is saying, I'm going to tell you stuff about Abraham. I'm going to tell you stuff about Isaac. I'm going to tell you stuff about Jacob. And Jacob is really, like, we're halfway through Genesis now, and it's all really about Jacob now. I mean, God told us about creation and Noah and Abraham and Isaac, but now we get to Jacob, and the next 20 some odd chapters is through Jacob's death in Egypt and being brought back and buried. So even though, like you were just talking about the tribes, yes, we learn about his sons and his daughter Dinah and all these things in weeks to come, Joseph in Egypt and the brothers. Jacob is from here on out through Genesis, and even into Exodus, even to God calling Moses, because he says, I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And I'm coming to, bring my people out of Egypt, and you're going to be the one to do it. And so Moses understands his role in God's covenant history through the lens of the patriarchs. Like, this is where that there's no other religion, there's no other story for Moses. This is who you are. It's because of these patriarchs. And so Jacob, I guess, I haven't done the word count, but I think of the three patriarchs, Jacob in the Torah, Jacob gets the most pen, right? Moses writes more about Jacob. And then we learn even through his children, we still see Jacob's behavior and responses in the background, like with the rape of Dinah, for example. And but anyway, so, and then like I think we talked about last week, when Jacob comes before Pharaoh at the end of Genesis, and Pharaoh asks, like, how old are you? And he says, many of the I've had many days, or many and evil are the days of my life, difficult. And this, how do we translate that? But and I did not attain to the days of my fathers. So God gives us the Torah. We're supposed to read it and carefully pay attention and identify with Jacob to the best of our ability. Like, what, instead of like judging him and go, yeah. And I'm not saying you're doing that, but I think, like, how did he feel about marrying two sisters? Obviously he didn't.
He didn't want to.
I believe this. I believe his heart was to marry Rachel, and that was it.
Yeah,
I think if you could go back to that moment in time, and there's that beautiful, like, such a great passage. It says he loved Rachel in verse 18, and he says, I'll serve you for your daughter Rachel. And then one of my favorite verses in the book Torah, verse 20, he served 7 years for Rachel. They seemed like a few days because of his love for her. That is where, like, we're getting like this core soul of Jacob. Like if we could just stop the world at that moment, it's like, oh, like, this is my woman. I'll work for 7 years. It's just like a few days, because he's so driven. Like, this is my one. This is what we would call, our soul. This is my soulmate. But it's a fallen world.
Right.
Jacob doesn't get the world that he wants. And it starts with this switcheroony, right? That Laban plays on him. He thinks it's his wedding. He thinks it's Rachel.
So here's
And so now what do I do? What do I do? They say, life gives you lemons, make lemonade, but this is a situation where like, well, he's learning his faith while he's like being dealt these blows and these punches. But I think if we go back to that moment where it's just the 7 years go by like a few days because of his love for Rachel, we don't get anything like that with any of his other wives. We don't get any statement of his love for Leah. He doesn't do Leah wrong though. You see what I mean? Like, so he could just like, well, what were his options? Okay, Leah, you're out of here. Sorry, I'm not going to take care of you. Your dad, he didn't do that. He took responsibility, even though Laban pulled the fast one on him. Same thing later when this is at the end of our Torah portion, when Jacob is leaving, going back, because God says it's time for you to go back. It's been 20 years or whatever. And then Laban pursues him. He's like, look, at great cost. Like I was, there were times when I was in the field watching over your flock, freezing to death. Like when a wild animal, I'm totally paraphrasing right now, but when there was damage to your possessions, I took the cost to protect your assets, So I think that those things are in the Torah for us to identify with an aspect of Jacob's personality, which is he's trying to do good. You know what I mean? In really difficult situations where it's not clear. And this is just, sorry, I'm going long, but back to the 1 Corinthians 13. Paul says this in verse 9, we know in part, we prophesy in part. When that which is perfect is come, then that which is in part will be done away. When I was a child, I spake as a child, this is King James. I understood as a child, I thought as a child. When I became a man, I put away childish things. For now we see through a glass darkly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, then shall I know, even as also I am known. I believe that we can understand Jacob and all the men and women of faith, all the righteous that we learn about from the scriptures through this lens of transformation, through walking as one of God's elect in a world full of sin and death, and learning from mistakes, right? Learning like, oh man. And that those mistakes don't just disappear. They become part of your story. They become part of like the wisdom that is obtained through the cost of just, the consequences. And so, Jacob is such an awesome, and of course he is called Israel by God. And we see that. That's not till next week, right? That's next Torah portion when he actually gets the name Israel, when he wrestles the angel. But
okay, so several things here, though.
I've been going long. You go ahead.
So when it comes to Laban, we've actually seen Rachel's family before, right? In other like
Rivka,
so
yeah.
But so when the servant of Abraham goes to search for a wife for Isaac, he goes and he meets this family, and the family seems like they're on the up and up, right? Like they're willing to listen to God. And so when we get back to this, we're back at this family now. Jacob comes and he meets his uncle. We've already met this guy in a roundabout way. And it's like, oh, okay, yeah, he did the right thing with his sister. Like the family was all happy for his sister to go and marry Isaac. And now all of a sudden it's like, okay, now we have a different one. It's like, but it seems almost night and day. He's got gods that he's worshiping. He's kind of a shyster, right? He's not like he's kind of he's digging Jacob for everything he's got. And it just seems like a little bit different, almost a different family than what was met before.
There could be a mini series that's just Laban and his family, and then like these cousin Eddie shows up. Hey, I'm here to marry one of your daughters. Okay, I guess we'll let him go. And then it's bad. Then it's like, what are they doing? But you pointed out these household idols, the teraphim, and if you track, okay, so there's three. I don't have the verse in front of me, but I just know it. There's three ways these things are described. Moses tells us that they're called teraphim. That's what the voice of the narrator says, teraphim. But when Laban's talking about it, he says, my gods.
Right.
Laban goes to Jacob and says, you stole my gods, which is, to me, I think people who know that there's only one God, this is like a moment of kind of is where like the laughter goes, like the audience kind of laughs. Like if you had a canned laughter knob, like it's like, because the idea of stealing a god, and this is that word Elohim, the idea of stealing an Elohim is comical from the perspective of a covenant member, right? If you're a covenant, if you belong to the covenant of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, this is a comical phrase. But if you're in the world of Laban, this is like really serious. And we get this confrontation, and then Jacob he says, whoever stole your gods, right? So Jacob acknowledges Laban's language, but then later says, Kalei Habayit, I think, or Kalei Vitecha, the vessels of your house. If anybody has any vessels of your house. So
but the other question that I have on this is, why did Rachel steal them? Did she steal? Because, I mean, did she know these gods? Did she want the gods? Did she put any weight in these gods?
This is such an awesome question, because scholars have tried to figure out, well, first of all, what are these teraphim? Like what Moses calls teraphim. Some ancient Near Eastern scholars say, these were, yes, they were like idols, but they represented inheritance and land rights. That, in other words, it was like a deed to property and possessions. And so that's one way of understanding the teraphim that scholars have put forward. And so you can explore that and say, okay, well, if Rachel took these, we're not told what her motive was. So some would say, it's because it's an idol and she was an idolater. Well, okay, but if it was like a deed, land, like whoever owned this, like, then she's taking.
Yeah, because it talks earlier about them wanting what they were owed from their father, right?
Yeah, like in other words, it is a somehow a mark or sign of ownership, similar to, I mean, it's not exactly the same, but later in Genesis 38, when Jacob goes and he wants to he sees Tamar. He doesn't know it's Tamar. He thinks she's a prostitute, and he doesn't have anything to pay. And so he says, give me this, this, and this. And so it's like his wallet and his ID and his car keys kind of thing. And so she holds to that, right? So she's got this stuff that later she says, the father, and he's like, let's burn her at the stake. And she says, the father, these are the things of his father. Yeah. And Judah's like, she's Reuben, more righteous than I, right? So you see, so my point is that it's true that there are objects in the world of the patriarchs that represent identity and like authority. And again, the Torah doesn't come out and tell us, but I think that is a plausible way to think of it, that Rachel, it's not an idolatry. It's an act of like, it's a jab, and it literally is a stealing then, but it's not for the sake of idol worship. However, we do know in next week's Torah portion that they had foreign gods among them.
Right.
And Jacob takes them and buries them.
The other question
is, but it doesn't call them teraphim there. So some people connect those, and we're not told that Rachel had the foreign gods.
The other question is
specifically.
whether or not she was really on her menstrual cycle or not. Because if she was, then it seems like she's almost dishonoring. If they're actually gods, right? If they're actually idols, it's almost as if she's dishonoring them. If the way of women is really with her, right? If not, if she's lying about it, okay, maybe not. But
That's another valid explanation, is that she thought her dad had false religion, that he was an idolater, and she stole them because they were false. There's the ancient midrash that the rabbis tell of Avram back in Ur of the Chaldeans when his father. The story is, this is not biblical. The story is the father made idols, and Avram went in there and destroyed all the idols, right? And then the dad comes back and says, "Why did you destroy all the idols?" And he's like, "Oh, the one he left undestroyed." He says, "Oh, that guy came around and destroyed all the others." And the dad's like, "Oh, don't you know these things can't move? They don't move." And Abraham's, yeah, or Avram. That's the point. They're worthless.
yeah.
So is this a jab to expose Laban's false religion by Rachel? These are all good discussions to have, and I don't have a solid answer. I think by God's wisdom, we're supposed to pursue these questions, though, even if we don't come with a super definite answer.
I got another one for you. Genesis 28:20. Then Jacob made a vow, saying, "If God will be with me and will keep me in this way that I go, and will give me bread to eat and clothing to wear, so that I come again to my father's house in peace, then the Lord shall be my God." Now, clearly, Jacob has already said that God is his God, right? I mean, it's not like he's just now saying, "Okay, fine, I guess you can be my God," right? But those words are there. I mean, if you will be my God, im yehyeh Elohim, right? So it's not as if the translation is off. Tell me what's going on here, Rob.
I look. This is the beginning of our Torah portion. Remember, he leaves on mixed messages. His mother Rebecca tells him to flee. Says, "You need to flee because your brother is going to kill you."
He's upset.
Okay, so what do you do with that message? Like, that is a fight or flight. Like, and your mother's the same mother that told you, "Look, it's going to be okay. Just go get a kid. I'll cook it up. Dress like Esau. Go into your brother." And he's like, "Mom, I'm not comfortable. Do it." So, but now it's like, yeah. So your brother's ticked, and, like, to put it mildly, he's breathing wrath. He wants to kill you. You need to get out of here. So flee. So that's one message. But then Isaac blesses him and sends him.
Yeah, again, he blesses him a second time.
Which message does he is like, am I going in the strength of the blessing, or am I fleeing?
Right.
Like, those are two. He's got to deal with, like, what his mom told him and what his dad told him. It's like, which story, like,
yeah.
Because even though his dad sends him with the blessing, he's still being sent away. And even though he can say, "Yeah, I'm going with the strength of the birthright and the blessing from Abraham and Isaac, and now to me," that doesn't remove the fact that his brother Esau wants to kill him. That's a real thing, that he can't stick around. So I think this vow with this vision that he has, the Sulam, Jacob's ladder.
Yeah.
And he's coming to discern the God of his God, the God of Israel. But he's dealt like, if this was a poker game, right? He's dealt like a really tough hand. Like, he doesn't have any good cards, like, in his hand. That's kind of maybe a vulgar kind of way to think of it, like, to bring something like profane, like gambling or something. But the idea is like look what's on his plate. Look what's on his plate. His twin brother wants to murder him. And he can't stay home. He has to go somewhere he's never been on his own. And God gives him this vision to encourage him. And so he makes this vow. And this vow, to me, reflects his uncertainty of like, okay, I'm heading into the unknown. I'm gonna. You say you're going to be with me, and that's that verse. If indeed you're with me, and then the verbs there, the shamar, right? You protect me, right? And you give me bread to eat. So this reminds me of like the Lord's Prayer, right? A daily bread, like the priestly blessing. The Lord bless you and protect you. Like he's like, look, I have all he has is his staff.
Right.
Okay, and I'm going out I'm out into the wilderness. I'm going out where there's beasts, predator beasts. There could be bandits. I don't have anything. And he's like, okay, I'm leaning on you. But he's a little bit like, okay, I'm going to hold out. But through a vow, he's expressing that he's how would you say it? I don't want to say withhold judgment on God, because that doesn't sound right. But it's like he's like, okay, I'm going to take you as your word for it. But he realizes he's going into this future totally alone, and he says, if I return in shalom, and that again reminds me back to what becomes the priestly blessing, and the Lord give you peace is the end of it. Is like God's protection, God's provision, God's gracious provision, God's favor, and then finally peace, shalom. And it's like he's reasoning, he's using the vow to express a kind of rationality of, oh, I'm going out into this scary unknown. I'm going, yes, on one hand with the blessing of my father, but that came after my mom said, you need to leave now because your brother's going to kill you. He's in a difficult situation. He's using this vow as a way of saying, okay, I'm going to die. I'm going all in. I'm going to do what my mom and dad said. They told me not to get a wife. I saw the wives that my brother has and the bitterness they brought to the family. And I'm going to do my best to honor what my parents said to do. And I have no idea what that's going to look like, but I'm going to lean on the God of the covenant. And then, when it comes back around, this is indeed, what we find is true. God shows himself faithful. Jacob, there's no, Jacob never like turns to idolatry or anything like that. He does his best as a father. Doesn't mean he's perfect. Again, back to that 1 Corinthians 13, we see it. He learns the childish things as he's maturing.
Yeah,
he trusts Laban, right? He thinks Laban is like a reasonable human, and then later it's like, oh no, not so.
To me this reeks of Eastern covenant language and mindset. In other words, it's not Jacob. To me, Jacob is not saying if I don't come home in peace, then you're not going to be my God. That's not what he's saying. And I think that the way that it sounds into our minds is, he's saying that, if God doesn't do this, then God's not going to be his,
like he's
his
putting
God.
God to the test or something.
But this is not what's happening. It's more of I know God will do this, and therefore this is why he is my God. And we see this in the following narrative, right? God blesses him where he's at. Jacob trusts him, and clearly Jacob has a mind unto Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh. And so I think that there's a little bit of that going on. All right, I think that's going to do it for us. We could talk for a very long time. We could go verse by verse through this literally for a week straight. Probably still not hit all the content, but these talks are not meant to give you a full commentary. Rather, they're meant to spark ideas. There's plenty of other resources on TorahResource for you to look at. You can find my father, Tim Heggs, notes on this passage. There are multiple, I think there's 5 different notes for this passage, maybe even more. And so you can go to each one of those, get an even deeper dive. And then we have even more stuff in our library as well, where you could look at individual things in these passages. So yeah, have fun and enjoy this Torah portion. We will be back next week. Thank you much.